This episode of the Police One podcast is sponsored by Officer Store. Learn more about getting the gear you need at prices you can afford by visiting officerstore.com. Hey, welcome back to Policing Matters on policeone.com. I'm your host, Jim Dudley, and welcome back if you're listening, or hopefully you're watching as well on the YouTube channel. Well, everyone listening has heard of an APB, an all points bulletin. It's the lexicon of law enforcement, of important information to say, listen up, got something important to say. Well, it also stands for a new publication for law enforcement professionals called Applied Police Briefings, or apb.com. Their website is apb.com, and it is described here. APB is designed to be more accessible. There will be no cost associated with APB, so it can be read by anyone, anytime, for free. Each issue of the APB will showcase short 2 to 3 page briefs of published research articles. Each brief will be written using highly accessible language, omitting the jargon that often characterizes typical academic articles. Wow, that is music to my ears. I teach 4 different classes in crime data and analysis and research methods in writing and law enforcement. And wow, what a godsend for students. And, I'm really thinking how important this is for line officers. Well, I want to welcome to Policing Matters Craig Bennell and Kirk Luther, founding editor of APB, Applied Police Briefings. Welcome, guys.
Thanks very much for having us. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Jim. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, what a terrific publication. I subscribe to it. I'm going through some of these briefings, and I'm trying to get students to take a look at an abstract to decide whether or not they're going to use an article, but even sometimes the abstracts are a little bit abstract. How did you guys decide to do this? How'd you see the need? What's your background?
Yeah, I think Kirk and I probably have similar stories. The reason I thought this was a good idea, to be honest, was a personal experience I had had. I did grad school in England, and I came to Carleton University in Ottawa in 2002, and I did what all academics do, right? I was doing my research, thinking it was pretty good, thinking that I'm applied police researcher, so I thought, the research I'm doing is going to have an impact, and I would publish away in the peer-reviewed journals that we all publish in as researchers, and sort of the incentive structure at a university is really pushing towards these peer-reviewed publications. So I think, in reality, we were doing good research, good quality research. It was rigorous research. We were doing all the stuff that we should be doing. And I thought we were producing results that would matter and change the way it was looking at investigative issues at the time, and would change the way that investigators sort of investigate serial crime sort of situations. So I was publishing away, and we probably did about 6 different articles on the topic. And certainly I was hearing from, the 5 other people in the world that sort of study that issue, and they thought it was great, and that absolutely this is gonna be a game changer. But I would never hear from the police professionals I was trying to impact. And so we got to a point where, after probably 6 research articles on the same topic over the course of 2 years, hearing from no one other than my close colleagues, we decided to write a summary of that research. I think it was 2 or 3 pages, and we published it in a magazine in Canada called Blue Line, which is one of Canada's sort of leading law enforcement magazines that I know was read by police professionals. We published that 3-page summary after publishing for probably 3 or 4 years on the topic. And literally within about 2 weeks, I heard from, it must have been 25 police officers from across the country that were sort of feeling the same things we were writing about, and had some frustrations about what we were writing about. And they reached out and they engaged with us, and we started to have really meaningful conversations. And they thought the research was great, but they also had ways they could improve it. And it was like, it seems ridiculous sort of looking back on it, that was sort of eye-opening, but it was really eye-opening to me that, the people that we wanted to impact, police officers in my case, were not getting access to the research we were publishing. And if they did, they probably wouldn't be able to understand it, given all the statistical jargon and so on and so forth. So it was really that personal experience that, that was the seed of, we need to do something different. Academics there's a lot of policing researchers out there that want to impact policing, and what we're doing is not working. And what the university incentivizes is not working. So that ultimately led to this idea that what we need to do is publish in different sources, make it free, take it from behind paywalls that you often get when you try to access articles and journals, and simplify the language, right? Get rid of the statistical jargon, get rid of all the scientific, talk that nobody seems to understand. And to be honest, only about 5 people would understand, even in my own field, what I'm talking about, and change the way we do things. So I don't know, Kirk, if you had similar experiences, but that certainly was the origin for me of the idea to do something like APB.
Yeah, absolutely, Craig. So, I mean, one of the reasons that we got into this type of research, into these jobs, these careers, is that we want to make a difference. We want to help in some way, shape, or form. And like Craig said, we thought we were doing that in terms of, doing research which we thought would be meaningful to police and to help inform and change policy and practice, but the research just wasn't getting there. And so, echoing much of the same points as Craig, we would often try to do things like, whether it's write summaries of our own articles in Blue Line magazine, or write summaries of other articles, just to try and get the science out there to the people that need to know it. And then when Craig came to me with this idea for applied police briefings, I mean, it just really struck a note with me in terms of, this is what we need to start doing if we really want to make a difference. The job that police have, it's complicated and complex enough without trying to, get them to read these really complex and complicated articles that, I can't understand half the time. I probably shouldn't say that. We can edit that out, right, Jim? Yeah, and so, by trying to get the science into the hands of people that will be using it is, our ultimate goal. And a lot of my favorite research ideas come from talking with practitioners, figuring out what issues that they are facing. We can bring that back to the lab or do some field research and try to get some answers to them. And so I think this is just, one part in a larger movement or idea where we can really get science into practitioners' hands.
Yeah, and I think, we've tried to make these inroads before, and we start out with the best intentions. There's, the American Society of Criminology, and we have all these different versions of essentially evidence-based policing, American Society of Evidence-Based Policing. I just heard of Australia and New Zealand evidence-based policing, of course, UK. And, I think, like I said, I think we start out with these best intentions, and then we fall back into the old habits of talking the jargon that, turn people off. But from the articles that I've read, you guys do just such a great job of breaking it down that, you don't have to go back to the thesaurus and think, oh, well, what does that mean? Or go back to trying to understand the geometry of statistics. And I'm thinking about how great it's going to be moving forward, and hopefully there's no backsliding back into, the scientific jargon. How do you choose the articles? How do you break them down? Do you have, some trusted authors who will break it down for you? And is there some sort of a template that you use to gauge it? How's that working?
Yeah, I think there's a variety of different ways that we get briefs for people. One way is that, researchers like Kirk and I, who, as Kirk said, there's a lot of us that are passionate about trying to use our research to improve policing. So one way we get briefs is that, the authors of the original articles themselves say, I've done a good piece of research, I think, and I think it has some potential to positively impact policing. But they recognize it's not getting there in the same way that Kirk and I have. So they themselves can submit a brief of their own research, and so on. So that's one way. But another way we do it is that we keep our eyes out for research that's being published that we think is important. So one of the things that we do is, obviously Kirk and I read a lot of research, and we'll keep an eye on things that are really resonating with us, that we think that would be important for that to be out there for the broader police community to read about. So we'll sort of spot an article that we've read, and we'll reach out to the authors and say, hey, you want to, this is a new initiative that we've put in place, and does that interest you? And I think the reception from them has been great. They've really sort of liked the idea, and we've gotten a lot of positive response from them. We also look at when journals are published, journal articles are published, oftentimes on the website for the journal where the article is published. There's various metrics that the journal will keep track of. So, for example, they'll keep track of the sort of most downloaded article from a journal, or the most viewed article in the journal. So we can use those metrics to at least get a sense of, there are some articles that are really catching people's eye, really interesting. They may be controversial, they may be very valuable, whatever the reason is, it's clearly something that's attracting people to it. So we'll often look at what articles are getting those downloads, and we'll reach out to those authors. And for me, at least, I'm fairly active, not necessarily as a poster, but as a consumer on social media, Twitter and or X or whatever it is nowadays. So there's a variety of people on Twitter who are academics, but to be honest, most of them were police officers in their previous lives and have turned academics. People like Jerry Ratcliffe or Matt Ashby in the UK. And they often post about articles that they feel are really important, and they want to get the word out. And to be honest with you, I found that, following those individuals and sort of following the trail and seeing what articles they're talking about, I tend to agree with them that, yeah, this is something that it would be great for the police community to know about. So again, we just cold call those authors and see if they're willing to put something together and get the word out. Kirk, I don't know if have anything to add beyond that.
Yeah. So to add to that, and so Jim, I really like your point in terms of making sure we don't kind of slide back as well and get back into that jargon and get to a point where people have no idea what we're trying to get across again. And so we really rely on the audience to keep us on our toes. So we do our best to kind of engage with readers in terms of inviting or soliciting feedback from people, whether that's through X or LinkedIn, or just through informal conversations when we meet them at conferences. So we are all ears. We want this to be a useful resource to people. And so I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit some future plans we have for it. But also to that point, so once we receive a brief from whether it's the main authors or someone else that has done a brief on someone else's work, Craig and I will then review that article ourselves, and we'll also send it out for review to at least one academic and one practitioner. So we want to make sure, that the science is coming across in the correct manner, and that from practitioners that they see the use or value of it, that, everything that is being said or written is comprehensible to the audience that we're trying to get at.
Yeah, that's
I
great.
found those reviews from the police practitioners are the best reviews. And I don't know whether it's you would know better than me, Jim, whether this is just a personality trait of officers or whether it happens to be the folks that we've gotten on our practitioner review board. I find they're quite happy to tell us when we're going off the rails. I have found those reviews are the best reviews. Not discounting the value of the academic reviews, but in terms of making sure that we don't backslide and that we're staying true to our mission of writing stuff that's going to resonate with the police community, that's going to be understandable, going to focus on the practical implications. Sometimes I feel like my students, I get reviews back and it's all read, and the police officer, the practitioner we've sent it out for, has just gone to town on it. And they're absolutely right. So they call us out when, I think, it's hard for Kirk and I because we are academics. We've been in this field for a long time, and it's sometimes hard to see when we're slipping back into academic talk. So they help make sure that even though we thought it was clear, it's not clear. This is not going to resonate. This is not going to fly. To be honest, some of them seem to take great joy in doing that. And they think it's hilarious. It really has put me sometimes in the student shoes, and given me I now know what my students feel like when they get back something with a bunch of track changes in it and all these revisions that I know that we now have to make. So they've been a critical part of the success of this for sure, both the academics and the practitioners. But I have found the practitioner feedback has been extremely valuable, and it will ensure that we don't slide back into sort of old ways.
Yeah,
So
I think
Jim,
that,
I
yeah,
want to give a shout out to, all the authors that have contributed so far as well. So one of the kind of worries that Craig and I had at first is, are we going to get enough people to want to submit to this? Because it's not, Craig mentioned earlier about the academic incentives. And so not getting that peer-reviewed publication in a top-tier scientific journal. But what we found is that people are so enthusiastic to kind of submit to APB. They've been really great about the review process and trying to edit the articles to make it fit with what we're trying to achieve. And so, yeah, this would not be possible at all without all the dedicated people that have, submitted articles so far.
yeah, that's awesome. I love the fact that you have the academic, but you also bring in the practitioner, and we have that sort of overlay of pracademics. You mentioned Jerry Radcliffe. What a great guy. He's been on the show. I saw him in Boston last week, and he was running around. The guy's always busy. So it's not, surprising that he's working with you as well. And he really has a good sense, as he was a cop for 10 years in the UK. So he has that sense of not only the position of the academic, but also how's it work practically.
Yeah.
And I find, conflict sometimes with my own colleagues at San Francisco State University, where, they're PhDs, they've done the research, but there's sometimes a disconnect when they're talking about things like de-escalation, and there's this expectation that somebody who's been running around naked, doing drugs and smeared himself with his own feces, that at some point he's going to be rational and subscribe to your commands. And as somebody who's dealt with those situations, it's so impossible, and that doesn't happen sometimes. So to make the connection and say, yeah, in a best case scenario, this kind of de-escalation might work, but in some, you have to resort to, keeping your distance or using force in some of those situations. And so to have that reconciled between the academic and the pracademic, I think that's so valuable, especially to work in cops.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think I agree with you totally. I mean, there's a knowledge issue, right? Where academics simply don't understand the reality of police. I've never been a police officer. I've done tons of ride-alongs. I work with police officers, but I've never been a police officer. I've never had to be in the field de-escalating. So there's sort of a lack of knowledge of the reality. And of course, the only way I can learn that is by interacting and exposing myself to the real world of policing through ride-alongs and through collaborations and through going to training that you folks receive and so on and so forth. And I got to say, there is also, and I don't think it's unique to policing, there is also an arrogance in many academic circles and that's the really dangerous part, that they in reality don't know, but they feel they do. And I think you get that a lot. And, one of the things I've been so pleased with this, and, Kirk just mentioned it, is that I've not seen that level of arrogance amongst the people that are willing to contribute here. Is that, they want to engage meaningfully with the police community. They recognize that they think they have something to contribute, but by posting in these sorts of journals, they're going to hear back from police officers, and it will be a meaningful dialogue that's created. And that can only be a good thing, right? It improves the quality of the research, improves the relevance of the research, and so on. And then when we get that to the police community, they're able to take actions that they wouldn't be able to if we did this sort of ivory tower sort of research. So I think one of my main hopes is that APB will create that dialogue and contribute to that dialogue. And obviously there's other sources and forums where that's happening as well, but this can be an additional way of increasing the degree to which we're talking to each other, learning from each other, and on our side doing better research, and hopefully on the other side consuming that research and trying to implement it to improve the way that police officers do their job. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
And to add to Craig's point, one of the things that I think is incredibly important is that what we're hoping is that this is going to be another stepping stone to building that kind of sustainable collaboration between academics and police officers. So we really want research that's informed by practice, and we want practice that's informed by research. And so, we can't do that if we don't talk to each other, if we don't work with each other. And while, I'm not naive in thinking that APB is going to solve this issue, again, this is just another way that we can kind of build that bridge and have that connection with a group that we need to work with if we want evidence-based practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we've been doing it for a while in the industry. Like, I guess once a police officer reaches the level of captain and above, they look at a 32-page research study, and they want that 1-pager or 2-pager executive summary, right? So we've been doing it to some degree. What you're doing is not just that sort of 30,000-foot overview, but you do get into some of the meat of the studies. How do you choose which ones that you want to publish each? You come out monthly, that's right?
They come out, we've decided, at least at the outset, that we're going to do 4 times a year. So I think it's March, June, September, December. And we've sort of settled on, I think, that we're able to publish about 22 briefs each issue. So, across the year, we're talking about 88 briefs that, hopefully covering a wide variety of areas that will hopefully will have an impact. So it's quite there's a lot of other sources that do what we do, but sort of not the same volume. So we're hoping that we can, create that volume and get a lot of good research into the hands of the police community.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 4 times a year. Yeah.
And how do you prioritize? Are you looking for something related to search and seizure, something related to use of force, technology? What's your pecking order?
It's a good question. And I would say right now, in all honesty, again, Kirk, you can disagree with me. In all honesty, right now, and this may be something that we can work on. In all honesty, right now, I think there's no sort of, to a large extent, there's no real strategy involved. Let's look for good research, regardless of the area that it covers, and let's try to get that research into the hands of the police community. That being said, obviously, we know there are some hot button topics that issues around police community relations are always going to be a hot button topic, issues around police use of force, and so on. So I think we've naturally gravitated towards authors publishing in areas that, through our own experiences and through the feedback of readers and through the feedback of colleagues that we work with, we know that these are contemporary challenges that police services are facing. So I think we do sort of gravitate towards those to make sure we cover those off. But in all honesty, I do think moving forward, we probably can be a bit more strategic. For example, it's pretty clear to me, at least talking to my colleagues, that the whole AI sort of movement is now finding its way in a really meaningful way into policing, whether that's using AI to manage the massive volume of data that's coming through body cams, or whether it's AI to assist with report writing, or whether it's AI for predictive, whatever it is. That's an area that I don't think we have a brief yet around those sorts of topics. So certainly moving forward, we're going to sort of try to identify really good research on that topic so that we can start to inform that sort of discussion. So I think there's a lot of room for a strategy. Right now, I'm not sure how strategic we've been other than to try to identify important high quality research and people that want to get it out there. Again, Kirk, maybe you're being more strategic than I am, and I don't even know.
No, I fully agree with you, Craig. And we talked with the first issue of trying to even group the articles by theme, and a couple of things came up. Is one, we didn't want to kind of bias readers in terms of what Craig and I thought was important. And so, Jim, as you know, policing is incredibly complex, and there are so many different facets of policing. And so there's no shortage of topics that we can cover. And one of the things that we don't want to do with the issues that we publish is to alienate readers. So people that may not potentially be as interested in, say, investigative techniques. But if we kind of pepper those articles within an issue, and they're going to read through it anyways, maybe they'll, see how stuff is relevant to their particular area, or how they may not have realized the complexities of other areas or their interests in other areas. So yeah, we've been kind of going back and forth between whether we should kind of have these themes for each issue, kind of categorize the briefs that we're publishing. So far, it's working well, but again, we're all ears on terms of feedback from the audience.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we have done is so the system that we use to manage the journal and get it out to the world does track the number of views for each brief and the number of downloads for each brief. So we can see on a 30-day running basis, a monthly basis, a daily basis, what's happening to each brief. And that's useful information for us. So for example, the one that is getting the most hit and the other ones on this topic that are also very high in the download list are around issues to do with women in policing, around promotional challenges, around advice for women police officers, and so on. I knew that would get interest. I didn't realize how quickly it would rise to the top. So again, that sort of gives us some information that the readers of the last two issues, at least, are particularly interested in that topic. So that's something, we can sort of move there and see if there's additional work. So, in the issue coming out in December, there's another article related to women in policing. So we do sort of track those and use that as an indication of what's sort of resonating. There are some briefs that I thought were going to, take off like wildfire, and they haven't. I think maybe they're a bit niche and they're of value to some people, but it's a very niche area. So yeah, I think that, that is one strategic way that we've sort of navigated what we should be putting in issues and what we shouldn't be. But yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of work. I think, before we got on the podcast, we were talking about IACP and attending that conference. I think going to those places would be a great way to sort of get more information and get our finger on the pulse of like what are the challenges that police services in North America are facing. And of course we go to other conferences. I've never been to IACP, but that would be a wonderful opportunity to get a sense of what people are interested in talking about. And again, we could sort of move in those directions. So lots of room for improvement in the future, for sure.
Yeah. And legal aspects. I know some of your articles deal with legal aspects of maybe law changes or staying within the confines of the Constitution for searches or regarding the Second Amendment for firearms and things like that. Do you have a legal advisor, an attorney to look those kinds of articles over?
Kirk, take that one.
Yeah, so I mean, given that they are kind of briefs or summaries of existing research, we kind of rely a little bit on that initial peer review process. And then Craig and I kind of do our best when there are specific or certain kind of legal issues that come up within the articles. And so, yeah, while we're not lawyers by any stretch of the imagination, yeah, we don't have a lawyer on staff either. So we kind of rely on our understanding of case law to provide a bit of nuance if we're dealing with a law out of Australia or New Zealand, the US, Canada, and then how that could be applied to kind of other countries. So yeah, we make that very kind of clear throughout the issues that, this isn't concrete legal advice that we're trying to provide here, but talk about how the research maybe kind of aligns with or presents challenges or butts up against kind of current existing law in different countries. And one of the things that, we think carefully about is that the readership is growing in terms of, we thought this might be kind of a North American thing, but we are getting, a bit of international readership with this. And so trying to take that into account and yeah, be clear on what's permissible and not permissible in different countries. It's always going to be a little bit tricky.
Yeah,
I think it's a great point, though. Adding some legal representation on the review boards for those specific briefs where there is that sort of component. Again, hopefully throughout the process that was in place to get that published, editors of those journals sort of took care of that. And certainly I've published pieces where we've been encouraged to get feedback from lawyers about some of the content in our journals by the editor, and we've done that throughout that process. So hopefully that's been done. But I think it's a great idea to include that in our review board, so that for those briefs where there is that sort of concern that we have, making sure that things are tight, we can send it to those people, at least for a more experienced opinion than our own. Yeah, I'm gonna be writing notes throughout the podcast, Jim, and things that you can implement.
That's great. Hey, I want to ask you about the first couple of editions and some of the articles that you've written about. But first, I'd like to take a moment and thank our sponsor, Officer Store, equipping protectors with passion. That's how we operate, and it's how we live. We understand that having the right gear can mean the difference between life and death. Our goal is to get you the gear you need, when you need it, at prices you can afford. Visit us at officerstore.com. And we're back, and I'm speaking with Craig Bennell and Kirk Luther, founding editors of the APB, the Applied Police Briefings. And, guys, I get, sometimes I'll find articles or speakers talking about something I think will be interesting for the show. Oftentimes I'll get a note from my dear editor, Nancy Perry, and she will suggest somebody like you guys. And a while back, she sent me something on contagion fire, and I was going through a ton of emails, and I thought, contagion fire, what does that have to do with me? Can we send this to our Fire Rescue One group? And then of course, I realized, and I should have looked through it. I mean, I didn't even read the abstract, right? And so one of my good friends, Jason Potts, the director of public safety at Las Vegas, was showing the researchers, John DiCarlo, Dugolensky, and some others who collaborated on, of course, what we used to call, this shows how old I am, that we used to call it sympathy fire or sympathetic fire, officers who fire because other officers fire. And so they actually came onto the show. Actually, at IACP, they presented a little bit of that, of the study on how officers may tend to fire when they, in response to other nearby officers firing at a suspect. So are you guys just reading abstracts, or are you reading through the whole articles before you're making your decision? And are you talking directly with the authors themselves?
Yeah, so I think, we do want to ensure that, I think both Kirk and I are on the same page here. While we, primary goal is to impact the police community through getting research out there, we also want to make sure that the research that we're selecting to be in briefs is high quality research, right? I mean, people in the evidence-based policing world have made this very clear that, there's a spectrum of quality. And so I think we are quite selective in terms of the things that we're happy to submit. And so, yes, Kirk and I both of us are sort of trying to get articles at the same time to put in various issues. And but I think both of us are very careful about that. Certainly I will read before I reach out to any author, or if they reach out to me before I sort of commit, I will read the article and ensure that, I'm comfortable with the quality, that I think it was done in a rigorous fashion, and so on. And yeah, we, throughout the process, we have conversations with the authors, and, we go back and forth and provide edits. And sometimes there's questions about those edits and so on. We certainly don't want to, what we don't want to do, and this is why we have the academic reviewers, what we don't want to do is sort of change the research to such an extent in the summarization process, change it to such an extent that the research is no longer valid, or that we're not being factually correct in the final product. So, I read the articles to make sure that that's not happening, because that's a risk. We want to balance sort of clarity and engagement with academic rigor. So yeah, I'm quite careful myself when I select. Oftentimes I know of the authors, and I know that they have a good reputation for doing good research. I've read other work that they've done. Oftentimes the journal that the original work was published in is a good indicator of that. Most journals that publish policing research have a pretty rigorous review process. So, one of the upsides for us is that a lot of that work has been done. the ultimate article that was published in the journal is probably of pretty good quality, because those authors in the original process might have gone through 1, 2, even 3 sort of rounds of revision. So reading it thoroughly, conversing with the authors, making sure that we're on the same page with things, working with them to try to make it simpler without changing their findings. It's actually, I was surprised at how hard that is. The very first brief we wrote, this was done strategically, was a paper that I'm on, and it was the second study in a PhD dissertation of one of my students. And I chose it strategically because I knew it was going to be a total gong show. This was when we were working out the process. So I needed an author that was going to be friendly and patient. And we probably went through, I'm not exaggerating, and I chose a police reviewer that also I knew was going to be patient, but also brutally honest. And he was brutally honest. Jason Boucher, who's a police officer in Waterloo here in Ontario. Smart guy, honest guy, not a problem telling me how it is. We probably went through 6 reviews for that one piece to sort of get down the process. And it was quite a complicated review. It was about physiological arousal and use of force situations, and the relationship between an officer's physiological arousal and their performance and decision-making and so on. And the measures that we used in that study were quite complicated measures. So it was a good test case for, like, how can we take what is statistically and conceptually a very complicated piece of research, and can we turn that, and I think the original article was probably 35 pages in Microsoft Word. Can we take a long piece of very complicated research and turn it into something 2 pages someone's going to understand? It was super challenging.
Yeah.
And took a lot of work with the original authors, to sort of say, like, are we nailing down exactly what you want, but making it clear. Jason was great at indicating that we haven't reached it yet. It's still not clear to me. These measures are still too complicated. So I think there's a lot of collaboration with the authors to sort of get to the end point.
And just building on Craig's point, while I can't speak for academics around the world, one of the issues that we faced in our training to become academics is that we were taught to write in this complicated way because we have to lay everything out so things are replicable and reproducible. And so most of us, I would argue, were not taught to kind of condense things in this easily accessible, digestible manner. And so we kind of had to relearn a lot of the things that we've been taught for so long, we've been doing for so long. And again, the authors that we've been working with and their patience with us in their process, and seeing how complicated it is to turn these 30, 40-page manuscripts into a 2-page document that's easily accessible. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work, but I think, yeah, we're much better for it.
And the 2-page briefs was very deliberate. I mean, it was exactly what you said, Jim. I can't tell you how many times I've been told by academics or by police officers, my chief is not going to read this unless it's 2 pages or less. Like, they just don't have the time. I've been told that throughout my career. Thankfully, some of my grad students work within policing, so they're sort of great at writing briefs, and I've learned a lot from them about this process. But the 2 pages was very deliberate. And it was really based on that feedback that I think both of us have received, that, I'm quite happy writing a 40-page report and sending it in to my colleagues and saying, let me know what you think. That's not happening, and so yeah, it's again, it's largely the reviewers that have really helped us accomplish this final 2-page brief that hopefully is understandable.
All right, Craig. So for our next movement, we need to start making scientific papers down to 2 pages. I would very much appreciate that.
Well, I think there's a great funding opportunity for you. You guys could make a version of Google Translate from academic speech to real language.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we mentioned some of the other publications, the American Society of evidence-based policing, Jerry Radcliffe's own, primer on evidence-based policing. We've got great academics, academics at John Jay out, on the East Coast, all, doing their own things. Any alliances with any of them?
Yeah, so right now, no. I mean, alliance in spirit for sure, in terms of we're all trying to accomplish the same thing. In terms of formal strategic alliances, no. Not for any lack of desire, more for just the amount of work it's taken to sort of get us to this point, to get an operational website up, to format 2 issues, to work with the authors to get those art briefs for those issues. So I think, again, Kirk and I have chatted a lot about the future of this, and I think it's just been for lack of time right now. There are, as you say, societies in Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and some, I believe the US society sort of does something like this for its members. They also publish briefs. So again, we're not suggesting that this is a completely unique sort of venture. I do think there's a lot of strategic value in sort of partnering with them in some way. And certainly I think a plan that we have in the near future is to reach out to each of those organizations and explore if there's any interest, what that might look like, and how our efforts fit with their efforts. And so I have no idea what that would look like. And there's also organizations beyond the Societies for Evidence-Based Policing. In Canada, for example, we have the Canadian Association of Police Educators. We have the Canadian Police Knowledge Network that focuses on providing online training. There's a lot of groups that are sort of in the same space where we're trying to have a positive impact on what officers and leaders and trainers can do in policing. So I think, there's a lot of potential here. I think now that we had no idea whether this was going to be successful. We had, I was half expecting that, we'd publish the first issue and 20 cops would read it, right? We're at about, through the 2 issues, we're at about 5,000 views and downloads. So that certainly has exceeded my expectations. It may be low compared to some other things going on, but that exceeded my expectations. So now that we know that, we can do it, we have the systems in place and the processes in place, and it seems to be getting some traction. I think now it's about moving to that next level. And I think for me, it's about increasing the readership. And I'm not sure there's much that Kirk and I can do alone any more than we're doing now to do that. I think it's about expanding and creating these partnerships and getting the word out, doing podcasts like this. We have another podcast coming up to talk about similar issues over in Europe, going to conferences. And, we talked about IACP and putting on a panel talking about these issues. I think that's the next evolution, which will hopefully take it to the next level. And who knows, maybe in the future we will have a sort of issue per month by doing that stuff. What do you think?
And like Craig mentioned, we're incredibly thrilled at the reception that we've received so far. I mean, we didn't know if the proof of concept would work at all. If we just do 1 issue and then it kind of flop and we'd be done. So like Craig mentioned, I think it's we've been talking a lot about the future and what APB can do, and kind of collaborating with these other groups and figuring out how we can make this bigger and better, and constantly doing that. And so seeing how we can really create this meaningful capacity for change.
No, I think the more people hear about it, I think your audience will grow exponentially. And you guys are doing it on a shoestring budget or a no string budget. How are you doing it? You take no payments to subscribe. How are you supporting this great work?
Yeah, so we're totally committed to, I think one of the first things we agreed on is that this has to be free, right? It has to be free to the reader. I'm not suggesting that, I think every police officer is trying to get access to journal articles to inform what they do. But I have heard frequently of officers or managers or leaders or trainers trying to get access to something that's published and it's behind a paywall. And the reality is, unless you're affiliated some way with the university, it's really hard to access journal articles. Thankfully, our universities pay the subscriptions so that we get free access, but most police officers don't. So, we were adamant that this has to be free. But yeah, you're right. Right now it's everyone, myself and Kirk and editorial assistant and the reviewers, both the academic and the police officers, the authors submitting stuff. There's no payment to any of those people. Everyone's doing it for free. And I mean, I guess all I can say is certainly for Kirk and I, and the people that are directly involved with the journal as helping us put together the issues and reviewing it, are doing it for the same reason, right? The motivation is that we want to get this research out there. We want to have a positive impact. And thankfully, people have been extremely generous with their time. And again, it takes a lot of work on the author's part to do this. Again, some people, even my kids, when they were younger, was, how much do you get paid to do that article? I don't get paid nothing. And they're like, what are you doing then? So again, there may be misconceptions that authors that are submitting stuff are somehow getting some reward other than getting their research out, and that's not true. And again, I know we've thanked people already, but the amount of work that it takes to do these reviews, it's not a trivial task. And all of the people we ask have day jobs. We're asking professors to do it on top of what they already do. We're asking police officers and police trainers to review for us on top of a long day of policing. So it's impressive. And to me, it's sort of gratifying, heartwarming to know that there are a lot of people out there that are really interested in the common vision of trying to improve policing, trying to make the job easier, both for police officers, but also obviously for the public that they serve, and making sure that everyone's doing the best job they can do. So you're right, everything's free. A huge thanks to everyone. At some point, I think Kirk and I know we're going to have to do something. We're going to have to buy everyone dinner. We're going to have to pay them something, beer or dinner, or I don't know, something. But so far, everyone's been doing it for free.
We're going to have to create those challenge coins, Craig, to motivate people. But yeah, so Jim, just building on Craig's points, that intrinsic desire to see your work leading to some form of change is a really strong motivation for a lot of people. And beyond the people that Craig mentioned and thanked, we also have the benefit of being associated with Carleton University, and our library staff have been so incredible, very patient with us as well, in terms of helping us get the website set up, the journal submission portal set up, answering all of our questions, stuff that we had never even considered around DOIs and ISBNs and all these acronyms that we had no idea that we'd have to even think about. And so there's just been this really, really big team effort, and everyone has been so enthusiastic. And like Craig said, it's just incredibly heartwarming to see.
Yeah, and it should be a testament to our listeners and viewers to show that these articles are really worthy of review. It's great stuff, things cops should know about in their everyday duties, at least give them some hope for the future, that these studies are showing how the job is changing, that people are paying attention, they're doing the work to help support the job that they do. So I appreciate it. I found value in everything I've read so far. I plan on continuing. I sure hope you do. And before we close, I want to maybe if you could tick off a couple of the subjects that you're writing about or that you're reviewing for future readers and your future issues. Are you going to stay with the current format? I think it's very reader friendly, gives the introduction, talks a little bit about the authors, and then goes right into breaking down the article. Any conversation about a YouTube, or are you going to stick with the format you've got? Craig?
Yeah, I think the structure, I think we're happy with. So again, each brief, so it's 2 pages. Each brief has, we start with take-home messages right at the front end. We try to stick to 2 or 3. This is what you need to know from the brief. So even if that's all the time you have and you're just quickly glancing at it, at least you get some information. And then, the structure, just so I'm just looking at a brief right now, the structure is basically 4 questions are asked and the authors go through those questions. So, why did the researchers conduct the study? How did the researchers conduct the study? What did the researchers find? And how can the police use these findings? So across 2 pages, you get very concise information to answer those four questions. I think that has worked. I think the feedback we've received is that that structure is good. The 2-page limit is good. The structure is good. So I don't anticipate any sort of future changes there. We are looking to get some funding for this, not necessarily to pay people, but to sort of elevate it. So right now it's largely digital. And I think that works for most people. I think most people are consuming things digitally, but I do think it would be nice to have some hard copies. And thankfully, Kirk's had some money where we can do a few hard copies just to take to conferences and send to some key folks. There have been some key police leaders, Chief Rich Johnston, who works for the Barrie Police Service. He's the chief down there. He's a massive evidence-based policing advocate, very involved internationally in evidence-based police. He's been a real champion for us. So being able to send him a few copies so that he can take it around on his travels. So I think that will be a change. If we can get some grant money to help us print copies of this and so on, that will be valuable. Certainly attending podcasts like this, we're going to plan to do. And we're also talking a lot about developing a podcast ourselves around issues. And we're exploring, I don't know if you've looked at it, Jim, but we're exploring sort of AI generated podcasts. Obviously not as good as the real thing and can't take the place of people like you, but we have played around with them, and I'll tell you, they're scary good, some of them. And you can actually upload a brief and it will create a dialogue between individuals. And I actually played one of them for my kids, and they could not tell that it was AI generated. There are interruptions, there is tone, they're solid. So, we're playing around with that because we don't have the resources right now to sort of do a lot on the podcast front. But as a sort of something that could be used in the classroom, or just a different way of listening to it if you don't have time to read, just to chuck it on in the car, to have a podcast for a particular brief or for an issue. They've turned out to be accurate, and I kind of find it quite frightening how good they actually are. So we're sort of exploring those sorts of issues and so on. So lots of different things we're thinking about. I don't know if you have anything, Kirk, that.
Yeah, so I mean, we're constantly looking to just up our game and make this the kind of most valuable resource that we can. And so one of the things that we want to do when applying for funding is to try and up the design a little bit of it. So this is created by myself and Craig and an editorial assistant that we have. And so we don't have any design training or anything like that. We think it looks good, but of course, it could be better with some professional expertise. And then we also want to bring in things like, case studies to kind of lead to more discussions or conversations around things that maybe worked for some organizations, some individual officers, things that didn't work. So try and get that knowledge sharing happening, as well as trying to perhaps, and this is, Jim, where your point comes in about, having a lawyer kind of working with us as well, is to take new case law that comes out and try and distill that, because, that dictates a lot of what police can and cannot do. And so by talking about maybe perhaps new or controversial case law and trying to distill that in a digestible manner as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I've agreed with everything you've said so far, except for the AI podcast hosts. Totally opposed to that.
Don't worry, Jim. I won't let Craig talk you out of a job.
All right.
All good.
All right. Yeah, because you would cheat my listeners out of their drinking games, where every time Jim Dudley says something dumb, they have to drink, or if I say they have to drink. So yeah, what fun is there? Hey, thanks so much for taking time. What's next for you guys? Any personal publications or projects you're working on?
Yeah, well, the big project in our lab right now, which we're coming to the conclusion of, is we've been asked by our local police service, the Ottawa Police Service, to work actually with their dispatchers. And so we're in the final stages of developing training for 911 dispatchers here, and we're planning on rolling it out across Canada, because I think there is a need so that they can better manage mental health crisis calls that they receive. In Canada, at least, there isn't a lot of training on that. The training that dispatchers do receive is really designed for frontline officers. And while there is some valuable nuggets that they can take away from that, what the dispatchers tell us is that a lot of what they're learning in those classes don't really translate to on the phone, where you have no nonverbals, right? It's all just what you can hear. It doesn't necessarily translate to being able to sort things out in 5 minutes rather than 45 minutes. So they're taking that training, but they're just finding it doesn't translate to having to get information quickly from people over the phone. So we're just in the final stages of training. It's very much based on scenario-based training, and we've just run a pilot with a small group of the dispatchers here to get feedback, and having a train-the-trainer session in end of November, and then they're rolling it out in February. And that is from my understanding, talking to other services across the country, that is a gap that exists for many dispatchers. They're just not getting dispatcher specific training to deal with mental health or substance use crises on the phone, how to identify the issues, specific communication, if someone's hallucinating or having delusions, what are some specific communication strategies? So that's, I guess, our big project, and it's been great and very, very collaborative with the Auto Police Service. So
awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, for having us on. Really, really appreciate it. And thanks as well for the opportunity to allow us to plug something. I'll just plug one thing, because as an academic, I love to hear myself talk, and so it could go on too long. But one of the big projects that we're working on now is around cold cases. So there's not a whole lot of research out there, and specifically, and tapping into kind of my background and expertise on investigative interviewing. So we want to find out, why cases go cold, what factors lead to them being reopened, and what factors kind of are associated with the solvability of a cold case. And we know police organizations across the country, across North America, they're strapped for resources, time, money, personnel. And so whatever, we can kind of do to help that and provide justice for the victims and their families, we're really, really interested in this area now. I'm really keen to explore it more. So I'd encourage any listener, just get in touch with me and we can chat more about it. I'd love to hear their perspectives on things as well. So thanks again, Jim.
Yeah, awesome. Love to have you back when you guys have updates. Thank you, Kirk and Craig. That's honorable work, helping out the dispatchers. They're often neglected, and they're so important. They have such a important role in policing. Appreciate what you're both doing. It is a great project. Again, you've got a fan in me. I hope our listeners check it out. We're going to post the links in our show notes. And thanks again. Appreciate your time.
Excellent. Thanks so much for having us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim.
All right. Take good care. And to our listeners, I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you check out APB and see what they're bringing up. I'm sure you'll find interest in some of the articles, if not all of them. And I'm sure they'd love to get your feedback as well. So let me know how we're doing and what you thought of our guests today. Craig Bennell and Kirk Luther, founding editors of APB, the Applied Police Briefings. Drop me a line at policingmatters@police1.com. And hey, have a great day. I hope you're taking care of yourself. Stay safe, and hope to talk to you again real soon. Take good care.